By the time Mason Curran called my name out loud on that all-hands call, I already knew something was off. The way he smirked, like he'd just discovered gravity, told me everything I needed. "We're retroactively revising your KPIs," he said, voice slick with condescension. "Do your best to keep up next time." I didn't flinch. I just sipped my tea and nodded, like I hadn't spent the last 8 years making sure men exactly like him didn't burn this place down in a blaze of quarterly ambition. They say some people fight with swords. I fight with clauses. You want leaner? Fine. You want faster? Sure. But if you gut compliance and start cherry-picking performance metrics to make your pre-merger deck look shinier for the PE vultures, don't be surprised when one of those little paragraphs you skipped over comes back wearing brass knuckles. I'm not flashy. I'm not loud. And I sure as hell don't perform for boardrooms. But I know where every lever is hidden. Every clause I've ever written, every red line I've ever defended was built like a fuse. Silent until you yank the wrong wire. And Mason? He yanked every wire like he was trying to win a prize at a damn carnival. Quick pause before I dive deeper. If you've ever had to sit through your boss's ego parade while quietly plotting your survival, hit the like button and subscribe. Seriously, 97% of you listen but never sub, and every new sub helps this crew keep the lights on. All right, back to the fireworks. Let me rewind. When I first joined Senderlogics, it was a mess of duct tape contracts and handshake deals. Vendors onboarded with nothing but a W-9 and a LinkedIn profile. I spent 3 years just cleaning the rot, rewriting MSAs from the inside out, weaving in escalation protocols, indemnity language, automated flags. Clause 14.3b, that was my baby. Buried in the back half of a 74-page vendor doc, it outlined what should happen if procurement risk crossed a certain threshold without executive compliance approval. It wasn't for show. It was a circuit breaker, and it was already live. But Mason? He barreled in with his Gucci slides and his optimization mindset like the wolf of PowerPoint Street. First week, he cut the vendor audit team in half, said we'd build trust through velocity. Second week, he stripped pre-contract due diligence from standard onboarding. By week 4, he was slashing budget codes and demanding all department heads align incentives to growth. Translation: make your metrics look pretty or lose your seat. That's when he found me. He didn't like that I used phrases like risk tolerance threshold or compliance fatigue modeling. Said I was too embedded in old frameworks. I told him I didn't build frameworks to last 6 months. I built them so we wouldn't be indicted. He laughed, like I'd told a joke in the wrong room. Then came the Q1 review and that little speech of his on the call. Everyone else just froze. I didn't. Because what Mason didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that 2 months earlier, his staffing cuts triggered a vendor risk spike that crossed the clause 14.3b line. It was subtle, quiet. A single threshold breach buried in a risk register that nobody reads but me. I filed it, logged it, time-stamped it, and waited. So when he changed my KPIs post-factum, while the clause was already silently active, I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I opened the folder titled MSA Escalation Protocol, Do Not Modify, clicked forward, and sent one email. And the silence that followed, that was just the system taking its first breath. The thing about a trap is, it doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to sit still, quiet and patient until someone arrogant enough steps right into it. Mason's new initiative hit my inbox like a poorly disguised threat. Subject line: KPI performance realignment, Q1 back review. No greeting, just 3 bullet points and a passive-aggressive note about underperformance indicators from January through March. My bonuses, already delayed once, were now under revision. The irony? January was the month his compliance gutting tripped clause 14.3b. He just didn't know it yet. I sat at my desk rereading the vendor intake logs from 6 months ago. One of Mason's streamlining efforts was onboarding a logistics partner without full background clearance. I'd flagged it in the risk ledger, highlighted it in red, and filed an escalation memo when his team overrode standard procedure. The clause was built exactly for this scenario. If procurement actions pushed vendor risk above 0.72 without approval from the CPO or compliance lead, the clause initiated an automatic freeze protocol. The math was boring. The outcome was not. It kicked in at 0.78, quietly, without fanfare. It just waited for someone dumb enough to make it matter. And now Mason was tampering with performance reviews, erasing evidence, and toying with the numbers during an active clause, which legally was the equivalent of opening a gas line and lighting a cigar. I didn't respond to his email, not yet. I logged into the audit mirror, my private sandbox, where I kept clean backups of every critical file. Not because I'm paranoid, because I've seen this movie before, and it always ends with someone crying in front of a federal review board. First step, retrieve the original clause 14.3b documentation, full MSA, dated and signed. I located the risk breach log, timestamped, auto-generated, showing the trigger event on January 18th at 4:42 p.m. I pulled the vendor access logs Mason had approved personally, bypassing 2 out of 3 compliance signatures. Then I opened my memo, the one I quietly submitted to legal compliance the same day. Subject, vendor flag, risk score breach, threshold 0.78, clause review pending. I had a read receipt. I had a backup. And most importantly, I had no need to raise my voice. Mason sent 2 more emails that afternoon, one with a spreadsheet comparing team utilization efficiency across quarters, as if that proved anything other than his own desperation. The second was a request, no, an order, for me to justify my underperformance by EOD. He CC'd 3 directors, clearly expecting me to squirm under public pressure. I didn't reply. Instead, I clicked open the shared compliance folder titled Escalation MSA Protocol, added my memo, logs, and signed docs to a fresh packet labeled Rev Clause Activation Evidence and marked it high priority for internal legal review. I wrote a 1-line message, requesting immediate compliance confirmation on active clause 14.3b. Then I sat back, hit send, and waited. Not for approval, not for backup. For gravity. Because the thing about men like Mason, they move fast, talk faster, and think they're untouchable, right up until the ground disappears beneath them. Mason always picked the biggest stage for his little performances. This time, it was the quarterly strategy sync. Full company call, cameras on, smiles faked. He waited until the financial slide deck was up, right after the vision forward nonsense. That's when he decided to swing. Before we wrap, he said, all breezy like it wasn't premeditated, I want to acknowledge some, let's say, inconsistencies in Q1 performance reporting. He didn't name me at first. He just dragged it out, letting everyone shift in their chairs. Then he smiled into the camera. Elliot, do you want to explain why your procurement velocity dropped 17% below target? He knew damn well why, because 2 of the vendors he onboarded without proper clearance had to be paused for emergency compliance review. But Mason didn't want the truth. He wanted blood pressure. I didn't blink. Velocity isn't the primary KPI under the current agreement structure. He grinned like a kid catching his teacher in a mistake. Not anymore, he said. We're revising your KPIs retroactively, effective Q1. Dead silence. You could hear a mouse adjust its AirPods. I just nodded. Understood. I swear, he sat back in his chair like he'd just won a courtroom drama. The man really thought he'd done something. What he didn't realize was that changing key performance indicators retroactively while a live MSA clause is in effect isn't just reckless. It's a federal procurement violation. A big one. The kind you don't walk off with a LinkedIn post and a faux apology about misaligned intent. He thought he was humiliating me, but all he'd done was step deeper into the fault line. That clause, it wasn't some dormant appendix in a forgotten contract. It was active, documented, and now provoked. I clicked away from the call screen, opened my personal archive, and navigated to the locked folder at the bottom of the tree. Label, clause 14.3b, escalation, do not touch. Inside, every memo, log, breach notification, signed intake form, risk heat map, and time-stamped audit event tied to the auto trigger. I'd built the case like scaffolding. And with Mason's on-record KPI change, the structure was complete. One more violation, one more data point. That's all I needed. My inbox pinged with a new message from legal. We're reviewing your request. Please await formal response before engaging further. Good. Because I wasn't going to engage further. I didn't need to. Mason had just played himself into a bind so tight no comms department in the world was going to spin it clean. All I had to do now was keep my head down and let his own momentum carry him into the wall. The truth is, you don't always win by pushing. Sometimes you just brace yourself, let the other person swing, and step aside while they fall on their own damn sword. There's a distinct kind of stillness that settles in when you realize the storm has already started, and all you have to do is stand still and let it roll through. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't scrambling. Everything I needed was already there, quiet, organized, time-stamped. The system was moving beneath Mason's feet, and he hadn't even noticed the cracks forming under his polished shoes. First, I opened the January audit log, the one with the vendor risk flag that should have triggered a red-level review. I'd marked it clearly. Threshold breach, vendor A794 exceeded composite risk score post-onboarding, compliance sign-off not completed, breach logged at 0.78. Underneath it, Mason's email reply from that day, "Let's not get bureaucratic, the deal is fine, move forward." That line alone was enough to raise an eyebrow at legal. But I wasn't done. Next, I pulled up the read receipt from my memo that same afternoon. It had been sent to 3 people in compliance, 1 in legal, and Mason himself. Only 2 opened it. 1 flagged it for follow-up. No one acted. Then I attached the fully executed Master Services Agreement. Section 14.3b, page 62, highlighted and initialed by all parties. The clause was written in plain English, no buried jargon, no vague legalese. It said, in unmistakable terms, that if a vendor risk score exceeded the threshold without CPO sign-off, the agreement triggered an automatic operational freeze until internal legal review. No room for spin. No way to deny. Mason's name was right there in the routing approval history. He didn't just skip protocol. He walked around it, waving a flag. I added 1 more file, my personal audit trail. Every email, every log, every time Mason manually expedited a vendor without waiting for clearance. The most damning entry, February 11th. He ordered my team to onboard 2 fulfillment vendors within 24 hours, or expect performance-based cuts. Those vendors had red flags for insurance irregularities and overseas subcontracting, and he still forced it through. Subject line of my message to the Director of Legal Compliance: MSA escalation clause status. Immediate review requested. I didn't call. I didn't warn anyone. I just hit send. Then I sat back, closed the folder, and stared at the blinking cursor in the empty reply box of Mason's last KPI rant. There was nothing left to say. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about being right. It was about structural integrity, about not letting someone rip holes through a process that was built to protect us all, no matter how smug or senior they were. I exhaled, long and slow. The audit system had already started sending alerts downstream: vendor management, compliance dashboard, internal controls. I could see the logs pinging quietly in the background, a ripple traveling across a surface Mason still thought was smooth. By the time anyone noticed, it'd be too late to patch. And I didn't need to move. I'd already done my part. The clause was alive now. It started with a whisper, an alert in the corner of the compliance dashboard blinking red where it used to be green. No alarm bells, no fireworks, just one little word in bold: reviewing. By 2:41 p.m., that whisper had turned into a murmur. Finance pinged me, casual at first. "Hey, Elliot, did something update in the vendor queue? Looks like payment authorizations are bouncing back from the audit node." I didn't reply. 2 minutes later, another email came in. This one marked urgent, from someone in legal's operations group. Need confirmation. Is clause 14.3b, the one that auto-triggers a freeze based on vendor risk thresholds? I read it, took a sip of my tea, and forwarded them my original memo with the breach log attached. 1 word in the body: correct. At 2:56 p.m., the internal counsel looped in, subject line now all caps: immediate hold on procurement pipeline, clause 14.3b. That's when the lockdown began. Vendor access portals froze. Intake queues gray-screened mid-update. Requisition forms bounced back with error messages. This workflow is under audit review replaced every submit button. The whole procurement system entered a kind of digital purgatory, visible only to the few of us who knew what to look for. Then came the finance ripple. Scheduled payments stalled. Approvals hit error loops. The compliance dashboard, usually ignored, flashed a banner across the top in bold orange. Audit required. Merger prep ineligible. That alone would have caused panic. But Mason? Mason hadn't even caught up to the first domino. At 3:07 p.m., he sent the company-wide email. Subject: Who froze our systems? It was written like a demand, but I could hear the panic leaking between the lines. Mason didn't like not knowing. He didn't like being out of control. And right now, he had no idea who had just pulled the rug out from under his quarterly projections. I read the message, let it hang there. 3 minutes later, he followed up in the finance Slack channel. If this is system error, fix it. If it's a hold, I need names. Now. Someone replied, meekly, "We've been informed legal is reviewing a clause escalation. We're on standby." I closed the window. There was nothing left to explain, nothing to clarify. I opened my audit file chain, logged the latest event, the legal freeze timestamp from 2:56 p.m., and added it to the working doc. The same doc I'd been maintaining since Mason's first vendor override, the one I labeled Failsafe 14.3b Trigger Chain. Then I leaned back, clicked my pen once, and checked the temperature of my tea, still warm. The funny thing is, Mason thought his loudest moment would be the most powerful. But real power? It moves like smoke, quiet, invasive, undeniable. And now the smoke had found every open vent. At exactly 3:16 p.m., every screen in finance, legal, compliance, and C-suite lit up with the same subject line. MSA revision clause activated. I know the timestamp because I'd been waiting for it. I had the email alert set to high priority color-coded red. When it popped, I didn't flinch. I just opened it and let the words do what they were built to do. The email came directly from the Director of Legal Compliance. Not a manager, not a coordinator, the director. Attached was a 3-page summary memo, tight, surgical, brutal. Every word in it was chosen with the precision of someone who knew this might end up in front of a federal regulator. It outlined everything. Clause 14.3b had been active since January 18th, triggered automatically when Mason's vendor rush caused the procurement risk index to breach the defined limit. Because there had been no documented override or CPO sign-off, just an informal push from Mason, the clause had escalated silently in the background as designed. And now, thanks to his on-record KPI manipulation, especially the public retroactive revision during a live clause, he had violated 3 separate provisions in our procurement compliance framework. The legal memo spelled it out clearly. All current KPI adjustments tied to procurement performance are nullified pending audit. M&A readiness status is officially on hold until clause review is completed. Per clause language, a formal disclosure to federal procurement oversight bodies must now be initiated. One paragraph, just one, was highlighted in bold. Actions taken to materially alter performance indicators during an active risk-based clause review period may constitute a breach of compliance obligations under federal procurement statutes. And the final line? A simple sentence that snapped every oxygen molecule out of the call. Immediate remediation and leadership review recommended. The call wasn't supposed to start for another 10 minutes, but people had already begun gathering in the virtual room. Directors, board observers, legal. I was already logged in, muted, camera off. I didn't need to speak. My name was in the memo. My memo was the citation. Mason appeared 5 minutes later. His screen angled too low, his collar undone. His eyes scanned something just off screen, his monitor, no doubt. And then he did what every arrogant man does when the floor suddenly vanishes. He stalled. He didn't speak right away, just stared into the void. Then, without turning off his camera, he leaned sideways and whispered to someone out of frame. General counsel, I'm guessing. That clause wasn't actually in force, was it? No one answered him. And me? I just sat there, sipping my tea, because you don't fight a man like Mason with fists or fury. You fight him with silence, with structure, with the weight of his own signature on a clause he didn't respect enough to read. The room hadn't even started talking yet, but the energy had shifted. People were pulling up the clause, rereading the KPIs, realizing that every performance deck Mason had built, every slide he pitched to investors about lean growth and agile transformation was now radioactive. And all I'd done was send one email. The calendar invite came through without warning. No agenda, no prep docs, just a subject line that said everything. Board session, emergency compliance review, scheduled exactly when our weekly compliance sync was supposed to take place. That call never happened. Mason canceled it, probably hoping he could get ahead of the noise, but the noise wasn't waiting for permission anymore. When I joined the video call, the room was already full. Not just department heads, not just legal. The board was there. 4 of them. Camera angles too clean to be accidental, all in separate glass offices with lighting that screamed, "This isn't a discussion, it's an inquisition." I stayed silent. There's a rhythm to moments like this. You let the people who believe they're still in control open the show. Mason started talking immediately, fast and defensive, as if the speed would erase the consequences. He walked through a PowerPoint like anyone gave a damn about his pastel charts now. "This clause was obscure," he said. "It was never escalated properly to the leadership team. Had we known?" One of the board members, a woman named Janet, with a voice sharp enough to strip paint, cut him off. "Mr. Curran, you're saying you were unaware of the clause being active?" Mason faltered. "I was not made aware that it had been triggered. If legal had flagged it earlier..." Janet didn't blink. "Mr. Ramos, when did you become aware that Clause 14.3b had been activated?" The entire room shifted. Every eye turned. I unmuted my mic, looked directly into the camera. January 18th, 4:42 p.m. No panic, no flourish, just fact. I could feel Mason's silence. It wasn't confused. It was cornered. He tried again. With respect, that memo didn't reach the necessary executive layer. I never saw anything actionable. I didn't argue. I just opened the audit chain, clicked on the flag, and hit forward. To everyone in the meeting. Attached. The memo, the breach log, the vendor risk report, and the read receipt from Mason's own inbox. Time-stamped. Opened. Marked read. January 18th, 4:44 p.m. The silence on the call was heavier than anything Mason could spin his way out of. A different board member, an older man who'd been silent the whole time, leaned in and asked, "Did you take any action based on that report, Mr. Curran?" Mason opened his mouth, closed it, and that was the moment. You could see it shift across the grid of faces. The math clicked into place. No one needed a smoking gun. They had protocol, receipts, and Mason's own arrogance stacked like dominoes. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I muted myself again and leaned back, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Because sometimes you don't need to raise your voice, you just need to be the one who kept the receipts. By Thursday, the deal was dead in the water. The merger, which had once been pitched as a transformational opportunity for vertical integration, was officially paused indefinitely. The buyer's lawyers cited unresolved compliance escalations. Their tone was polite, clipped, surgical. Everyone knew what that meant. No one said it out loud. External auditors moved in by Friday. Not the friendly kind either, the sharp, surgical ones with badges, questions, and clipboards that never closed. They didn't care about Mason's color-coded dashboards or his aggressive growth narrative. They cared about dates, documents, sign-offs, and a clause that had gone ignored for too long. Clause 14.3b wasn't just alive. It had become the axis around which the entire investigation spun. Vendor files were requested, call logs pulled, procurement timelines dissected. Every decision Mason had bulldozed through in his quest for optimization was now held up under forensic glass. At 2:18 p.m. Friday, HR sent out a vague all-staff bulletin. Effective immediately, Mason Curran will be on administrative leave pending an internal review. Interim leadership will be announced shortly. No signature. No well-wishing. By 3:30, the finance leadership page on the intranet had been quietly updated. Mason's name gone. A placeholder title in his spot. Nothing dramatic. Just a surgical removal, like a tumor too deep for radiation. They didn't want to draw attention to the extraction. They wanted healing. That afternoon, I was called into a private call with Janet and 2 other board members. They didn't apologize. They didn't flatter. They just made an offer. Senior advisory lead, compliance infrastructure, reporting directly to legal with dotted line oversight on procurement and risk. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't need more control. I just wanted structural integrity to mean something again, so I thanked them. Told them I'd think about it. Then I closed the laptop and opened a new checklist. It was short. Just 7 lines. A new review path for the clause escalations, a lockout on KPI adjustments during risk freezes, independent audit keys for vendor onboarding, clean, measured, quiet. I printed it, initialed the corner, walked it down to legal and handed it off. No speech, no headline, no "I told you so." Vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just looks like a cleaner system, a quiet hallway, and an inbox that no longer flashes red every 5 minutes. When I walked past Mason's old office, it was dark. Door cracked open. Desk empty. The only sound was the low hum of the server room down the hall, working, stable, uninterrupted. Just how I like it. 6 weeks later, the merger came back online, quietly, cautiously, with half the buzz and twice the scrutiny. The buyer had revised their offer, knocked 10% off the table, and inserted a raft of new compliance conditions. Everyone pretended that was normal. Everyone knew it wasn't. But Clause 14.3b, it stayed right where it was, unedited, unsoftened. In fact, the new version of the vendor agreement used it as a template. What once was buried on page 62 was now part of the executive summary. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. 2 days before the merger finalized, I received an envelope. No ceremony, no fanfare. Inside, a check drawn from the executive retention pool. Low 7 figures. Triggered by a clause I'd buried in my own contract 2 years ago, back when no one cared what the senior compliance strategist had to say about contingencies. It was called Retention and Continuity in the Event of Compliance Disruption. That's the thing about people who like to talk over you. They never imagine you'll outright them instead. I signed nothing flashy, no exit statement, no announcement post on LinkedIn. I just declined the advisory offer politely, turned in my badge, and requested one last meeting to close out my files. Mason never showed. His separation was processed through legal. 3 digital signatures, 1 exit email, no reply. Rumor was he negotiated a non-disclosure clause into his departure. Of course he did. Men like Mason always try to erase the ending they didn't control. I went home that evening, unlocked the cabinet where I kept my hard copies, and began archiving everything. Risk logs, contract drafts, printouts with notes in the margins. Not because I needed them, just because I liked the sound of paper when it closed. On the top shelf was the original printout of Clause 14.3b, highlighted in yellow, the ink slightly smudged from when I first wrote it. I slipped it into a new folder, labeled it Resolved, and slid it back into place. Then I turned out the light, poured a drink, and sat by the window as the sun dipped behind the houses across the street. They thought a clause was just a formality. I thought it was an exit plan.